Rabbit saved a wounded lion from drowning. Next morning, the forest stood still at his burrow. The river had turned red. Not the soft pink of dawn reflected on water, but the deep crimson of something torn open, something dying. The rabbit froze at the bank, nose twitching, every instinct screaming, "Run!" But through the churning rapids, between the rocks that broke the current into white chaos, something massive moved. Not swimming, thrashing. A golden shape, darker where wet fur clung to muscle, lighter where blood mixed with foam. The shape rolled, went under, surfaced again with a sound that was not a roar, but something worse, a wet, rattling wheeze that echoed off the canyon walls like a plea the wild had forgotten how to answer. The rabbit's heart hammered against ribs thin as grass stems. He was a desert cottontail, built for stillness and speed, for disappearing into shadow. Not for this, never for this. But the river was pulling the lion downstream, toward the falls, where the water dropped 30 feet onto rocks that had crushed elk and mountain goats. The rabbit knew those rocks. He knew their hunger. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this bond between these creatures has already touched you, tell us where you're watching from. To witness every act of courage, every impossible friendship, and every silent miracle of nature, subscribe and join our circle. The next moment will change everything. Now, back to the wild. Part 1, the incident and the proposition. The lion went under again. The rabbit moved before thought could stop him. Not toward the water, he was prey, he had never learned to swim, but along the bank, downstream, his powerful hind legs eating distance in bounds that left small clouds of dust hanging in the air. His vision tunneled, the rocks ahead, the barely there sandbar where driftwood had piled up over seasons, creating a temporary dam that slowed the current. Just maybe enough. He reached it as the lion surfaced one more time, closer now, carried by water that cared nothing for apex predators or the order of things. Up close, the rabbit could see the wound, a deep gash along the lion's left flank, still bleeding, turning the water around him into ribbons of pink and red. Bullet wound, probably. The humans had been in the high country recently, their metal scent still clinging to the wind. The lion's eyes found him. Even dying, even drowning, those eyes carried the weight of 1,000 hunts, 1,000 kills. They were amber going dark, filmed with pain and exhaustion, but they saw. They knew what the rabbit was: food, flight, the natural order written in instinct and blood. The rabbit did not run. Instead, he did something his species had no name for, no genetic memory of. He began to dig. His front paws tore at the sand and mud of the bank, flinging it backward, widening a small depression near where the driftwood created a pocket of slower water. He dug with the desperate speed of an animal making a burrow to escape a hawk. Except this time, he was creating not an escape, but a trap, a catch, a chance. Sand flew. His claws hit rock and skidded, broke, bled. He kept digging. The lion was 20 feet away, 15. His massive head kept dipping below the surface, staying under longer each time. The rabbit could hear the water filling the lion's lungs, could hear the way the breathing had changed from wheezing to gurgling. Death had a sound in the wild, and this was it. 10 feet. The rabbit stopped digging and did the second impossible thing. He jumped into the water. The current seized him instantly, a giant's hand closing around a seed. Cold shocked through his small body, stealing breath, stealing heat. His legs kicked automatically, the same motion that sent him bounding across meadows, but water was not earth. It gave him nothing to push against. He tumbled, went under, surfaced gasping, went under again. But the current was also pulling him toward the lion. They met in the chaos of white water and red blood, prey and predator brought together by the river's indifference. The rabbit's frantic paddling brought him alongside the massive body, close enough to see the individual whiskers, the scars on the muzzle, the way one ear was torn at the tip from some old fight, close enough to smell death sweetening the wet fur. The lion's eyes opened. Recognition flickered there, not of the rabbit specifically, but of warm-blooded life, of something that moved with purpose while he was only being moved. The great head turned slightly, and for a heartbeat the rabbit thought, "He's going to kill me. Even dying, he'll kill me, because that's what lions do." But the jaws didn't open. The eyes just held him, asking a question the wild had no words for. The rabbit grabbed the lion's mane in his teeth. It was coarse and thick, heavy with water, and the taste was wrong. Salt and copper and something else, something fierce that made the rabbit's whole body want to bolt. But he held on, his small jaws clenched around the wet fur, and he kicked. Not to swim, not really, but to angle them both toward the sandbar, toward the pocket of slower water he'd tried to create. The current fought him. The lion was easily 400 pounds, most of it muscle and bone that wanted to sink. The rabbit weighed less than 3 pounds soaking wet, which he was. The mathematics of it made no sense, but mathematics don't account for desperation, for the strange fire that lights in prey animals when they stop running and start fighting the world itself. Inch by inch, the rabbit pulled them sideways through the current. His back legs found purchase on something, a submerged log, a rock he didn't know and didn't care. He pushed. The lion's body shifted, turning slightly, catching the current differently. The change was small but crucial. The water began pushing them toward the bank instead of just downstream. The driftwood loomed. They hit it hard enough to drive the air from the rabbit's lungs, hard enough to make the lion's eyes roll back. But they stopped moving downstream. The sandbar was just beyond, where the water pooled and calmed. The rabbit's jaws ached. His lungs burned. His legs had gone numb from cold and effort, but he didn't let go. He kicked again, pulling them around the driftwood into the pool. The lion's paws touched bottom. It happened slowly, awareness returning to muscles that remembered earth, that remembered standing. The great cat's legs folded, then pushed, lifting the massive head above water, then the shoulders. The rabbit let go of the mane and scrambled for the bank, his own legs barely responding, pulling himself up onto sand that felt as solid and perfect as any heaven his kind believed in. He collapsed there, sides heaving, water streaming from his fur. The lion crawled after him, not chasing, just crawling, dragging himself from the river with the last reserves of strength, pulling his wounded body onto the sandbar. The blood started again, painting the sand dark. The lion made it 3 feet from the water and stopped, too exhausted to go further. For a long moment, the only sound was breathing. The rabbit's quick and panicked, the lion's slow and labored, bubbling in his chest. Then the lion's head turned, looked at the rabbit. Those amber eyes, clearer now, studied the small creature who had defied every law of nature to pull him from drowning. The rabbit met that gaze, still too exhausted to be properly afraid, too stunned by his own actions to run. The lion's eyes closed, not in death, but in something like acknowledgement. His breathing steadied slightly. The bleeding began to slow. The rabbit stayed, not out of choice at first. His legs wouldn't carry him yet, his body too cold, too drained. But as the minutes passed and the lion didn't move to kill him, something else kept him there, something that had no name in the language of instinct. The proposition had been made, life given for life. The debt existed now, written in blood and river water, binding them in a way neither species had words for. The sun began its slow arc toward evening. The rabbit's fur dried in patches, standing up in small tufts that caught the light. The lion's breathing grew stronger, more regular, though the wound in his flank still wept. Neither moved. The river rushed by, indifferent now, having failed to claim its prey. Finally, when the rabbit's legs would answer him again, he stood. The lion's eyes opened, tracking the movement. The rabbit could run now, should run. The natural order demanded it. He took one hop toward the underbrush where his kind belonged. The lion made a sound, not a roar, not even a growl, something softer, almost questioning, a rumble that vibrated in the sand between them. The rabbit stopped, turned back. The lion was trying to rise, trying to follow, but the wound made him stagger. He got his front legs under him, haunches still on the ground, and looked at the rabbit with eyes that held something besides hunger now, something like need. The wild had rules, predator and prey, hunter and hunted. These were laws older than mountains, carved into the bone of every living thing. But the river had washed them clean, at least for now. What remained was simpler. Two animals, one dying, one impossibly alive, bound by an act that made no sense and therefore made perfect sense. The rabbit moved back toward the lion. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that the lion could see him, could know he hadn't been abandoned. The great cat's eyes followed him, then closed again, conserving strength. As twilight gathered, the rabbit began to notice things. The lion was young, maybe 4 years old, his mane still darkening toward the full black it would never reach now without help. The bullet wound was infected, the flesh around it hot and swollen. The lion had been dying before the river, the drowning just a faster path to the same end. The rabbit knew plants. His kind survived on knowing what was safe to eat, what would heal, what would kill. There were herbs near the water, growing in the shade of the canyon walls. Yarrow for bleeding, plantain for infection. His mother had taught him their shapes, their smells, passing down knowledge that stretched back through generations of rabbits who'd survived by being small and smart instead of big and strong. He gathered them in the failing light, making trips back and forth, carrying stems and leaves in his mouth. The lion watched when his eyes were open, but didn't move, perhaps understanding this was help, perhaps just too weak to care. The rabbit chewed the plants into poultice, mixing them with mud from the riverbank, the way he'd seen his mother do for his siblings when they'd torn themselves on thorns or barbed wire. He approached the wound. The lion's eyes opened fully then. The warning was clear in them, the instinct too deep to drown. Don't. The rabbit paused, the poultice dark and wet between his small paws. They looked at each other across the distance that separated their kinds, across the million years of evolution that said this moment was impossible. Then the lion's eyes closed again, not in sleep, but in surrender, in trust, or something close to it. The rabbit pressed the poultice to the wound. The lion's whole body tensed, muscles cording under the golden fur, claws extending to scrape furrows in the sand. But he didn't strike, didn't turn his head to snap those massive jaws. He just endured it, shaking slightly, while the rabbit packed the wound with medicine and mud, sealing it against infection, against bleeding, against death. When it was done, the rabbit stepped back. His white belly fur was stained with lion's blood now, painting him with a color that screamed danger to anything with eyes to see it. The lion's breathing had eased slightly, the medicinal plants already beginning their work. Night fell completely. The desert went cold the way it always did, heat fleeing skyward, leaving behind a chill that made small animals burrow deep. The rabbit shivered. He looked toward the underbrush, toward safety and warmth and the familiar dark of his burrow. The lion was watching him again. The rabbit made his choice. He hopped closer, settling into the sand just beyond the lion's reach, where the huge body blocked the wind and radiated heat like a boulder that had spent all day in sun. It was the closest he'd ever been to a predator by choice. The wrongness of it sang in every nerve. But he was cold, and the lion was warm, and the debt between them was still being written. The lion rumbled again, that questioning sound, softer now. The rabbit closed his eyes and let the warmth seep into his small body. Around them, the desert night came alive with the sounds of hunting. Coyotes yipping in the distance, the scream of a rabbit dying somewhere in the dark, and owls' wings cutting silence. The natural order continuing, indifferent to the impossible thing happening on this sandbar, in this moment. Predator and prey, sleeping in the same shadows. Both alive when they should be dead. Both bound now by something the wild had forgotten how to name, but couldn't help but honor. Part 2. The Labyrinth of Instinct. Morning came copper and cold. The rabbit woke to the lion's eyes on him, amber catching the first light, watching with an intensity that made every instinct scream. But the great cat hadn't moved in the night except to breathe, and the wound beneath its poultice seal had stopped weeping. The infection's heat had lessened. Not healed. Healing would take time, the desert rarely granted, but stabilized, alive. The rabbit stood, shook sand from his fur, and the lion's head lifted to track the movement. There was hunger in that gaze now, sharp and undeniable. The lion hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. The bullet had probably interrupted a hunt, sent him fleeing wounded into the high country, where the humans couldn't follow, but where prey was scarce. His ribs showed beneath the golden fur, each breath making them more visible. The rabbit should run. The debt was paid. Life for life, balanced. That was mercy enough. But he could see the lion trying to rise, could see the way the wounded flank made him falter, how standing took 3 attempts and left him trembling. A healthy lion could run down a rabbit in seconds. This one couldn't run down anything. Without food, the wound would never heal. Without healing, he'd die slowly, and the desert had no patience for slow deaths. The rabbit bounded away from the sandbar, upstream where he knew the land. The lion watched him go, and something in those eyes dimmed, some brief and foolish hope extinguishing. Predators didn't expect mercy twice. The rabbit didn't look back. He raced through scrub brush and around boulder clusters, following paths only his kind knew, invisible highways worn by generations of small feet. The morning was waking around him, birds calling, lizards emerging to sun themselves, the whole desert machinery grinding to life with the heat. Somewhere above, a hawk circled, and the rabbit instinctively ducked beneath an overhang until the shadow passed. He found what he was looking for in a meadow 200 yards from the river, a doe, heavy with fawn, lying in the tall grass. Dead. Not killed, died. Probably giving birth too early, the fawn stillborn beside her, both already starting to bloat in the gathering warmth. Coyotes hadn't found them yet, but they would. Everything in the desert found death eventually. Death was patient and everywhere. The rabbit couldn't move the doe, couldn't even move the fawn, small as it was, but he could lead others to it. He raced back toward the river, toward the lion, moving in a pattern that would draw attention. He bounded high, visible, exposed. Dangerous for a rabbit, but effective. When he was 100 yards from the sandbar, he saw the lion had dragged himself to the edge of the water, drinking in long, desperate pulls. The great head lifted as the rabbit approached, water dripping from his muzzle. The rabbit stopped, looked at the lion, then turned and bounded back the way he'd come, visible and obvious, waiting. The lion didn't move, didn't understand, or didn't trust, or simply couldn't follow. His legs were shaking just from the effort of drinking. The rabbit returned, stopped again, looked back, bounded away. The pattern that meant follow to every creature that ran in packs or herds, the universal language of movement. The lion stood, not quickly, not gracefully. His wounded flank made him list to one side, and twice he nearly fell. But he stood, and when the rabbit bounded away again, he followed. One slow step, then another, his paws leaving deep prints in the sand, his breathing labored even at this crawl. The journey that had taken the rabbit 3 minutes took them 20. The lion had to stop 4 times, flanks heaving, the wound weeping fresh blood through the poultice. The rabbit waited each time, visible in the brush ahead, until the lion could move again. Predator following prey, trust and desperation blurring into something neither had names for. When they reached the meadow, the lion smelled death before he saw it. His whole body changed, instinct overriding pain. The ears pricked forward, the head lowered. He moved faster now, following scent instead of the rabbit, forgetting the wound in the sudden sharp focus of hunger remembered. He found the doe in the grass. The rabbit watched from the edge of the clearing as the lion fed. It was brutal, efficient, necessary. The sounds were wet and terrible, the kind that reminded the rabbit exactly what the lion was, what he would always be. Bone-cracking, flesh-tearing. The lion eating like he was dying, which he had been. But he was dying less now. With food in him, the wound would have a chance to heal. With healing, strength would return. And with strength, the rabbit's ears flattened. He was saving something that would eventually hunt him, hunt his family, hunt everything he was built to protect. The mathematics of mercy made no sense in the natural world. Yet he stayed, watched. When the lion had eaten his fill and lay panting beside the carcass, sides distended, blood on his muzzle, the rabbit was still there. The lion saw him. For a long moment they regarded each other across the space that separated full belly from eternal vigilance, predator from prey. The lion's tongue came out, licking blood from his lips, and the rabbit's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Old fear, cellular fear, the kind that lived in bone marrow and couldn't be reasoned with. But the lion didn't rise, didn't hunt. He just looked at the small creature who had led him to food, and something passed between them. Not understanding, they were too different for that, but acknowledgement. The debt growing deeper, stranger, more binding. Over the next 5 days, a pattern established itself. The rabbit would disappear at dawn, foraging for himself, checking his burrow, a complex warren a half-mile from the river where his mate waited with 6 kits too young to open their eyes. He'd brought her food, grass and tender shoots, but hadn't told her about the lion. How could he? The words didn't exist. She knew only that he came and went at odd times, that he smelled wrong, that something had changed in him. Then he'd returned to the lion, who'd made a den in a cluster of boulders near the sandbar. The wound was healing, slowly, fighting infection, but healing. The rabbit changed the poultice daily, gathering fresh yarrow and plantain, adding comfrey when he found it. The lion bore these ministrations with increasing patience, sometimes watching the rabbit work with eyes that held something like curiosity. The rabbit led the lion to food when he could find it, carrion mostly. The desert provided. A javelina killed by a truck on the distant highway. A coyote dead from poison meant for him. Once, remarkably, a roadrunner caught by a snake that had then been caught by a hawk that dropped it when a golden eagle challenged for it. The chain of violence that fed them both. The lion grew stronger. By the 4th day, he could walk without limping. By the 5th, he could run. The rabbit saw him chase a ground squirrel, miss it, but the attempt itself was a statement. Life returning, strength rebuilding. And with strength, the questions started to surface. The rabbit saw it in the way the lion watched him now, Not with the glazed confusion of pain and near death, but with sharp, calculating intelligence, the way a hunter watched, the way predators studied prey before deciding whether to spend energy on the chase. On the sixth day, everything changed. The rabbit was foraging near the river when he heard them. Voices, human voices. He froze, dropping low in the brush, every sense straining. They were upstream, maybe 300 yards, but sound carried in the canyon. 2 humans, maybe 3, their sense thick with metal and chemicals and that particular wrongness that made every wild thing nervous. They were tracking something, following blood, probably the lion's, though it was old blood now, nearly a week old. But humans were persistent. They wanted their trophy, or they wanted revenge for a missed shot, or they simply wanted to finish what they'd started. The rabbit burst from cover, racing toward the lion's den. Speed was what he had, what evolution had given him in place of size or strength or claws. His legs ate distance, white tail flashing, heart hammering. He found the lion outside the den, grooming himself in a patch of sunlight, the picture of feline indolence. The wound was a pink line now, healing clean, the infection beaten. The lion looked good, healthy, dangerous. The rabbit skidded to a stop and stamped his hind feet against the ground, the alarm signal, the universal code for threat approaching. He stamped again, urgent, then bounded toward the deeper canyon where the rock faces were too steep for humans to follow. The lion lifted his head, ears swiveling. He'd heard them too now, or caught their scent on the wind. His lips pulled back from his teeth in a silent snarl. This was the thing that had wounded him, put the bullet in his flank, the thing that made loud noises and brought pain. But he didn't run. Lions didn't run from threats, they eliminate them, or they establish dominance. Retreat was for prey. The rabbit stamped again, desperate now. The voices were getting closer. The lion looked at him, and the rabbit saw the decision forming in those amber eyes, saw the predator mathematics. 3 humans with guns versus 1 wounded lion. Bad odds. But running felt like defeat, and lions were built from pride more than sense. Then the lion looked at the rabbit again, really looked, the way he had on the sandbar when he'd been dying. The small creature who'd saved him, who'd fed him, who changed the wound even when those small paws shook with fear of the teeth so close to them. The lion stood and followed the rabbit into the deep canyon. They moved quickly, the lion's strength fully returned, his stride eating ground. The rabbit led him up a narrow defile where humans in their clumsy boots would struggle, through a chimney of rock that required squeezing through gaps, across a scree field that would be treacherous in hard-soled shoes. The kind of terrain the wild owned and humans only borrowed at risk. Behind them, the voices grew fainter, frustrated. The rabbit heard them arguing, heard them decide the lion had moved on, wasn't worth the danger of following into technical terrain. They stopped in a small box canyon, hidden and defensible, where a spring seeped from the rock and formed a tiny pool. The rabbit's sides heaved. The lion panted, tongue lolling, but his eyes were bright with something like exhilaration. The hunt reversed, the hunted leading the hunter to safety. The lion approached the spring and drank deeply. When he finished, he turned to the rabbit, and for the first time in 6 days, he vocalized. Not the questioning rumble, but a sound from deeper in his chest, a vibration that the rabbit felt in his bones more than heard. It resonated in the small canyon, filling it with a sound like distant thunder. A chuff, the sound lions made to their pride, to allies, to family. The rabbit's ears came forward. He didn't have a sound to answer with, no call that matched. But he hopped closer, close enough that the lion could reach him in a single movement if he chose. Close enough that trust was no longer a word, but a physical distance being crossed. The lion lowered his head, bringing his massive face level with the rabbit's. They were eye to eye now, amber to black, predator to prey. The lion's breath washed over the rabbit, warm and carrying the scent of meat and life and fierce things. Then the lion's rough tongue came out and licked the rabbit once, from ears to tail, a single grooming gesture that soaked the rabbit's fur and left him smelling undeniably of lion. The rabbit stood very still, processing this. He now carried the scent of an apex predator. Every prey animal that smelt him would flee. Every predator would think twice. The lion had marked him as pride, as protected, as belonging. The debt had shifted again, become something else. Something without precedent. They rested in the box canyon as the sun climbed toward noon. The rabbit dozed in the shade while the lion watched the entrance, guarding it the way he would guard a den with cubs. When the rabbit woke, he found a dead quail beside him, freshly killed, the neck broken cleanly. The lion was sitting 10 feet away, watching to see what the rabbit would do. The rabbit didn't eat meat. His kind never had. But he understood the gesture, understood the lion had hunted for him, shared kill with him the way pridemates shared. He sniffed the quail politely, acknowledging the gift, then hopped away to find grass and flowers for himself. Behind him, the lion made that rumbling sound again, something that might have been lion laughter, and ate the quail himself. They stayed in the box canyon for 2 days, waiting for the humans to leave the area. The lion hunted successfully now, bringing down a young pronghorn, feeding himself properly for the first time since the bullet. The rabbit foraged, finding rich patches of clover and wild alfalfa. But on the second evening, as the light turned gold and stretched their shadows long across the canyon floor, the rabbit became restless. He'd been away from his burrow for too long. His mate needed him. The kits needed him. The pull of family was a physical thing, a tightening in his chest that made it hard to breathe. The lion noticed. How could he not? The rabbit was pacing, was moving toward the canyon entrance and back, toward and back, the classic sign of an animal torn between two imperatives. When the rabbit finally bounded toward the entrance, the lion followed. They traveled in the last light, the rabbit leading again, but different now, not showing the way, but sharing it. The lion kept pace easily, moving with the fluid grace of full health, his wound now just a scar that would fade with time. They reached the area near the rabbit's warren as full dark fell. The rabbit stopped at the edge of the territory, his territory, where the scent markers of his family were thick on the rocks and brush. The lion stopped beside him. This was the moment where things would return to normal, where the debt would close and the natural order would reassert itself. The rabbit would go to his burrow, to his mate and kits. The lion would return to his wandering, his hunting, his solitary life. They would both survive the impossible thing they'd done, and they would never see each other again. The rabbit looked at the lion. The lion looked at the rabbit. Neither moved toward parting. Then, from the darkness ahead, a sound. A kit's cry, high and distressed. Then another. The sounds of scuffle and panic, the prey alarm that every rabbit knew in their blood. The rabbit bolted toward the warren, fear erasing thought. The lion surged after him, not hunting, but responding to the same urgency, the same pack instinct that said family under threat meant respond, meant fight. They burst into the warren clearing together. 3 coyotes had dug into the burrow entrance. One was halfway in, dirt flying from its scrabbling paws, the sounds of the kits louder now, terrified. The other 2 were keeping watch, and they turned as the rabbit appeared, their eyes lighting with predatory interest. Easy kill, dinner running toward them. Then, they saw what was behind the rabbit. The lion didn't roar, didn't need to. He simply was. 400 pounds of apex predator materializing from the dark like a nightmare given golden fur and teeth. The coyotes froze, every instinct screaming contradictory commands. Fight? 3 against 1? But that one was a lion. Flee? But the prey was here, vulnerable. The lion made the decision for them. He charged. Coyotes were smart, survivors by wit rather than strength. They ran. All 3, even the one halfway in the burrow, scrambling backward and bolting into the brush. The lion chased them 50 yards, roaring now, the sound rolling across the desert like thunder, claiming territory, establishing dominance, warning everything within a mile that this place belonged to him. Then he trotted back to where the rabbit stood frozen at the burrow entrance. From inside came the sounds of the kits, frightened but alive. The rabbit's mate appeared at the secondary entrance, her eyes wide, her body ready to flee. She saw the rabbit first, then the lion, and everything in her said, "Run, hide, the predator is here." But the rabbit hopped to the lion and sat beside him, looked at his mate. The message was clear even without words. This one is safe, this one is pride. The doe stared at them both, her whiskers trembling with the impossibility of what she was seeing. Her mate sitting beside a lion, both alive, both calm. The world turned inside out. Slowly she approached, not close, but closer than any rabbit should approach a lion. The lion watched her with eyes that held no hunger, only a strange calm. Then he turned and padded to the boulder cluster 20 yards from the warren entrance. He settled there, massive and solid, positioning himself between the burrow and the direction the coyotes had fled, taking up guard. The rabbit's mate looked at her partner. He touched his nose to hers, the gesture that meant, "Safe, safe, we're safe now." And together they descended into the burrow to comfort the kits. Above them, under the vast desert stars, the lion kept watch through the night. Nothing approached the warren. Nothing dared. Part 3. The Revelation and the Fracture. The lion stayed. Not in the warren, he was too large, too fundamentally other, but near it, in the boulder cluster that gave him shade during the day and a vantage point at night. He hunted in the early mornings and the evenings, bringing down jackrabbits and ground squirrels, once a small deer that fed him for 3 days. He didn't hunt near the warren. That was understood, a boundary neither had discussed but both honored. The rabbit's mate accepted this new order slowly, the way prey animals accept anything that doesn't immediately kill them. Her kits were safer with the lion nearby than they'd ever been. No coyotes returned, no foxes prowled close. Even the hawks seemed to avoid the area, sensing something wrong in the scent geography, the unnatural alliance that marked this territory. The kits, when they were old enough to emerge from the burrow, knew nothing of the world before the lion. To them, he was simply part of the landscape, like the rocks and the scrub brush, dangerous but familiar. They played in his shadow while he dozed, chasing each other around his massive paws, their mother watching with nervous attention that slowly relaxed as days passed without violence. The rabbit spent his time between two worlds. He foraged with his family, teaching the kits which plants to eat, which to avoid, the 1,000 small lessons that meant survival. But he also sat with the lion, in companionable silence, both of them watching the desert move through its cycles. Sometimes the lion groomed him, that rough tongue that could strip hide from bone, gentle enough to smooth the rabbit's fur without bruising skin. Sometimes they simply shared space, predator and prey, the mathematics of mercy rewriting itself daily. 3 weeks after the lion had chased away the coyotes, a drought settled on the desert. The spring rains that should have come didn't. The small seasonal streams dried to dust. The plants withered, going dormant or dying, and the prey animals began to move, seeking water, seeking food, following instinct toward the places where these things might be found. The rabbit's family began to suffer. The kits were weaned now, but still growing, still needing nutrition the increasingly sparse vegetation couldn't provide. The doe's ribs started to show. The rabbit ranged further each day, finding less. Water was available from the spring in the box canyon, but food was the problem. Food was vanishing. The lion noticed. How could he not? The kits moved slower, played less. The doe no longer ventured far from the burrow, conserving energy. The rabbit returned each evening with less in his stomach, the hollows around his eyes deepening. One evening, the lion brought his kill to the warren, a fat ground squirrel, freshly killed. He laid it at the burrow entrance and stepped back, looking at the rabbit. The rabbit approached slowly. The squirrel was still warm, blood barely dried. Food, protein and fat and calories that could keep his family alive. But he was a rabbit. They were rabbits. This wasn't for them. He looked at the lion, trying to understand. The lion pushed the squirrel closer with one massive paw, then rumbled, the sound that meant pride, family, share. The rabbit touched his nose to the squirrel, acknowledging the gift, but didn't eat. Couldn't eat. His species had evolved away from meat millions of years ago, developing the complex digestive system that processed plants, the teeth that grew continuously to handle the grinding. Meat would make him sick, might kill him. But he understood what the lion was offering. Understanding carried its own weight. Over the next week, the lion brought more kills. The rabbit couldn't explain that they couldn't eat them, that the gift was meaningless no matter how well-intentioned. But the lion kept trying, kept bringing food, kept watching the kits grow thinner with eyes that held something like frustration. Then the temperature spiked. A heat wave settled over the desert, pushing past 110 degrees, sucking the last moisture from everything living. The kits stopped playing. One of them, the smallest, stopped moving much at all, just lying in the shade of the burrow entrance, panting. The rabbit tried everything. He traveled to the box canyon and brought back the succulent plants that grew near the spring, their leaves thick with water. He dug for roots in the dry stream beds, finding moisture inches below the surface. He stole from the scattered cattle ranches at the desert's edge, slipping through barbed wire to reach alfalfa fields irrigated by wells. But it wasn't enough. The drought had teeth, and it was eating his family. On the 9th day of the heat wave, the rabbit woke to find the smallest kit dead. She had simply stopped breathing in the night, her small body unable to maintain the energy balance needed for life. The doe was curled around her, making sounds the rabbit had never heard her make, grief without language, loss without remedy. The rabbit sat beside them in the burrow's darkness, feeling something break inside himself. He had saved a lion, had achieved the impossible, had bound himself to an apex predator in friendship, had rewritten the rules of the wild. But he couldn't save his own daughter, couldn't provide the simple things, food, water, coolness, that life required. He emerged from the burrow as the sun rose, turning the desert into a furnace. The lion was there, watching the entrance, sensing that something was wrong. The rabbit looked at him, and for the first time since the river, felt anger. What good was a lion's protection if his kit starved? What good was this impossible alliance if it couldn't change the things that actually mattered? The lion had food, killed and ate whenever he wanted, his body designed for hunting, for taking what he needed from the world. The rabbit had only cleverness and speed, and neither could make rain fall or plants grow. The rabbit turned away from the lion and began to dig. Not a burrow, a grave, in the soft sand near the entrance where the morning light would touch it. The doe brought the kit's small body out, and together they buried her, covering her with earth that was too hot, too dry, waiting for rain that wouldn't come. The lion watched but didn't approach. Perhaps he understood this was grief, and grief needed space. Perhaps he simply didn't know what to do with death that wasn't caused by hunting, wasn't part of the clean mathematics of predation. When it was done, the rabbit sat by the small mound and felt the alliance crack. The debt between them had been profound, had changed both their lives, but it lived in a separate space from family, from the obligations of mate and kits and survival. The lion had his world and the rabbit had his, and the drought was making it clear those worlds didn't truly overlap, no matter how impossible their friendship seemed. The rabbit stood and hopped away from the warren, away from the grief and the remaining kits, and the doe's eyes that said, "Do something, save them. You saved a lion, but you can't save us." He needed to move, needed to run. He bounded across the desert floor with no destination, just burning off the feeling in his chest, the rage and helplessness and sorrow mixing into fuel. The lion followed. The rabbit didn't want him to, wanted to be alone with this, to process it in the way of prey animals who had no one to share their burdens with, who survived by being solitary in grief because gathering attracted predators. But the lion followed anyway, matching the rabbit's frantic pace with an easy lope, staying 20 feet back, giving space but not abandoning. They traveled 3 miles before the rabbit finally stopped, exhausted, in a small canyon where the heat shimmered off the rocks in visible waves. He collapsed in the only shade available, sides heaving, eyes closed against the world. The lion approached slowly, laid down beside him, close enough that the rabbit could feel the radiant heat from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the lion did something extraordinary. He began to purr. Not the soft purr of a house cat, but the deep, resonant purr that lions use to comfort their young, to bond with pride members, to communicate safety and belonging. It vibrated through the ground, through the air, through the rabbit's small body pressed against the earth. The rabbit's eyes opened. He looked at the lion, at the eyes that held concern and something like helplessness. The lion couldn't fix this, couldn't make rain, or bring back the dead kit, or change the fact that drought was a force neither predator nor prey could fight. But he could be here, could offer presence, the only currency that mattered when the mathematics of mercy failed. The rabbit shifted closer, pressing his small body against the lion's flank, feeling the purr through his bones. They stayed like that as the sun climbed higher, as the heat became dangerous even for desert-adapted animals. The lion's purr never stopped, just maintained its steady rhythm, a sound that said, "I'm here. You're not alone. Pride doesn't abandon pride." When the worst heat passed and the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, they made their way back toward the warren, slower now, side by side. The rabbit's anger burned out into something closer to resignation. They found the doe and remaining kits at the burrow entrance, waiting. The doe looked at the rabbit, then at the lion, and something passed between the adults. An understanding that they were doing everything they could, and it still might not be enough. That night, the lion left the boulder cluster. The rabbit watched him go, a golden shadow moving into the darkness, heading toward the distant mountains where storms sometimes gathered. Part of him wanted to follow, wanted to abandon the warren and the doe and the kits and the grief, to return to the simplicity of the river when there had been only 2 lives at stake instead of 7. But he stayed, because that's what prey animals did. They stayed with their families, even when staying meant watching them suffer, meant being helpless in the face of forces too large to fight. The lion was gone for 3 days. During that time, another kit died. One of the males, strong just a week ago, his body unable to maintain itself on the sparse rations. The doe barely responded this time, just curled around the remaining four with eyes that had gone distant and dull. The rabbit dug another grave, sat beside it, watching the stars emerge, feeling himself fracture under the weight of failure. He had defied nature once, had saved a lion from drowning, had created an alliance that made no sense to anyone but them. But nature was bigger than alliance, bigger than friendship, bigger than any individual act of mercy. Nature was the drought and the heat and the simple fact that rabbits needed food and there wasn't any. On the fourth day, the lion returned. He wasn't alone. The rabbit heard them first, the sound of hooves on rock, the bleating of sheep. He emerged from the burrow to see the lion driving a small flock ahead of him. 6 domestic sheep, fat and well-fed, stolen from some ranch or farm in the distant lowlands where irrigation still allowed grass to grow. The sheep ran in panicked circles, hemmed in by the lion's presence, their eyes white with fear. The lion herded them to the warren and stopped, looking at the rabbit. The rabbit stared at the scene, trying to process it. Sheep, livestock. The lion had brought what? The sheep couldn't stay here, wouldn't survive here, any more than the rabbits were surviving. This wasn't a solution. But then the rabbit noticed the sheep were dripping. Not with water, but with something on their wool. Something the lion had driven them through. He approached cautiously and caught the scent. Alfalfa. Fresh alfalfa, crushed and clinging to their fleece from fields they'd been grazing in. The lion had brought the fields to them. The doe emerged from the burrow, followed by the kits. They smelled the alfalfa immediately, their instincts overriding their fear of the massive predator and the panicking sheep. They approached, began to pull the green food from the sheep's wool, eating with desperate speed. The sheep tried to run, but the lion was there, a wall they couldn't pass. They circled, bleated, trembled, but they stayed. And clinging to their wool was enough alfalfa to feed a rabbit family for days. The rabbit looked at the lion. The lion looked back. It wasn't a permanent solution. The alfalfa would be eaten. The sheep would eventually need to be released or they'd die here. The drought would continue. But for now, for this moment, the lion had found a way to provide, had bridged the gap between what rabbits needed and what lions could do. The rabbit hopped to the lion and touched his nose to the massive paw. The lion lowered his head, and they stayed like that, while the doe and kits fed, while the sheep gradually calmed, while the desert evening painted everything in shades of gold and amber. The fracture didn't heal completely. Couldn't. The dead kits were still dead. The drought was still killing the desert. The future was still uncertain. But the alliance held, bent but not broken, tested by reality and still somehow standing. That night, the lion released the sheep, driving them back toward the lowlands they'd come from. They ran gratefully, probably heading straight back to their ranch, where the farmer would find them and wonder what had driven them to bolt, what predator had chased them but miraculously left them alive. The rabbit and the lion met at the boulder cluster as the moon rose. They didn't speak, couldn't speak, but the rabbit's eyes held gratitude, and the lion's eyes held something fierce and protective, the look that said, pride, family, I'll find a way. The debt between them had changed again, grown deeper. No longer just life for life, but life-sustaining life, ongoing and active and demanding more than either had imagined when they'd met in the red water of the river. The return and the trial. The sheep incident changed something fundamental in the lion's behavior. He began to range wider, hunting not just for himself, but bringing back strange things to the warren. Not kills. He'd learned those wouldn't help, but objects, discoveries, solutions. He found a rancher's water trough 3 miles away, cracked and leaking. Over 2 nights, he widened the crack using his claws and teeth, turning the leak into a steady flow that created a small stream running toward the desert. The rabbit followed the water to a depression where it pooled, where plants would soon grow, where his family could forage closer to home. He discovered a grove of mesquite trees in a hidden canyon where the roots went deep enough to find water even in drought. He led the rabbit there, showing him the way through the maze of rocks and arroyos, a 5-mile journey that took them into territory neither had explored before. The rabbit brought his family to the grove, all of them making the trek in the cool of dawn. The doe was skeptical. It was far from the warren, exposed during travel, dangerous. But the mesquite was green and lush, the pods fat with moisture and nutrients. The kits ate until their bellies distended, and for the first time in weeks they played afterward, chasing each other between the trees while the lion watched from a nearby ridge. But the human world was noticing the lion's movements. Ranchers were finding strange signs. Sheep driven miles from their pastures but unharmed. Water troughs destroyed, but not in ways consistent with animal behavior. There was purpose in the damage. Tracks everywhere, lion tracks, always heading toward the same general area of the desert. They started setting cameras. Motion activated. Infrared, capturing images of the lion traveling in patterns that didn't make sense for a solitary predator. He was going to and from specific locations, like he had territory he was defending, or, stranger still, like he had a den with cubs somewhere. But the cameras also captured something else. In 3 separate images, taken at different locations over a week, they showed the lion with a rabbit. Not hunting a rabbit, walking beside one. The images were clear enough to show the rabbit was always the same individual. White blaze on the forehead, distinctive marking on the left ear. The photos made it to social media, then to local news, then to national news because the story was too strange, too impossible to ignore. A lion and a rabbit traveling together across the desert. Proof that nature could break its own rules. Scientists wanted to study them. Documentarians wanted to film them. Trophy hunters saw a unique kill. Animal rights activists saw a symbol. Everyone saw something, and everyone wanted to come to the desert to witness it. The rabbit knew nothing of this, knew only that the human scent was growing stronger in their territory, that the sound of vehicles on distant roads was becoming more frequent. He grew nervous, spending less time at the mesquite grove, more time hidden in the warren. The lion noticed. He'd been through this before. The bullet that had nearly killed him had come from human interest in where he traveled, what he hunted. He understood that attention from their kind meant danger. He stopped traveling with the rabbit in daylight, started covering their tracks, walking in the rocky areas where paw prints wouldn't show. Became nocturnal again, the way lions weren't usually nocturnal but could be when hunted. For a week it seemed to work. The human activity stayed distant, clustered around the areas where the photos had been taken, searching for something that was no longer there. Then they found the warren. Not deliberately. A group of wildlife photographers following the lion's old trails stumbled onto the boulder cluster. They saw the marks where the lion had bedded down, saw the rabbit burrow 20 yards away, saw the trails between them, worn by months of traffic, lion paws and rabbit feet moving back and forth, creating physical evidence of the impossible alliance. They set up their cameras and waited. The rabbit was foraging 3 miles away when it happened. The doe and kits were in the burrow, safe from the midday heat. The lion was sleeping in the shade of the boulder cluster, recovering from a long night hunting. The photographers got dozens of shots. The lion waking, stretching, magnificent in the golden afternoon light. Then the doe emerging from the burrow with the kits. The kits playing near the lion, hopping around his paws while he watched with eyes half closed. The doe grooming herself just feet from the massive predator. Proof. undeniable proof that this wasn't chance encounters, but a living arrangement, a family unit that violated every law of nature. The photos went viral within hours. By evening, the desert was full of people. News vans, camera crews, scientists with permits, tourists who drove out from Phoenix hoping to see the miracle for themselves. They parked along the distant highway and hiked in, dozens of them, all converging on the warren. The rabbit returned at dusk to find his world invaded. Humans everywhere, their scent thick and wrong, their voices loud in the desert quiet. They'd set up lights, were filming the Burrow entrance, had people positioned around the boulder cluster trying to get the perfect shot. The rabbit froze at the edge of the chaos, every instinct screaming flee. But the doe was in there, the kits were in there, and the lion. He found the lion at the far edge of the boulder cluster, pressed low against the rocks, his eyes tracking the humans with the intensity of a predator deciding whether to fight or run. The rabbit could see the tension in every line of his body, could see him calculating odds, distances, threats. Their eyes met across 30 yards of desert floor crawling with humans. The lion's ears went back, his lips pulled away from his teeth. The rabbit understood. The lion wanted to attack, to drive these invaders from his territory, from the den where his pride lived. But there were too many, and they had guns. The lion remembered guns, remembered the bullet, remembered dying. The rabbit made a decision. He hopped into the open, directly into the lights and cameras, sat there, calm and visible, letting them see him. The humans went crazy, shouting, filming, calling to each other to look at the rabbit, the famous rabbit. While they were focused on him, the lion moved. Not toward the humans, but away, circling around the boulder cluster toward the Burrow entrance. The rabbit saw him go, saw the plan forming. If the lion could reach the burrow, could position himself at the entrance, he could defend it, could protect the doe and kits even against this many humans, because they'd have to come at him through a narrow space, one at a time. The rabbit kept the attention on himself, moved in small hops, casual but visible, leading the cameras away from the burrow. When one photographer tried to approach him, he hopped away, maintaining distance but staying in view. A living distraction, deliberate and brave. The lion reached the burrow, positioned himself at the entrance, a golden wall between his family and the world. Some of the humans noticed, started filming him instead, but by then it was too late. He was in the defensive position, and everyone there knew what a cornered lion could do. The standoff lasted 20 minutes. The rabbit in the open, drawing fire that was only cameras but felt just as dangerous. The lion at the burrow, radiating threat, daring anyone to come closer. The humans slowly realizing that this wasn't a documentary opportunity but a potential disaster. A protective lion, a warren full of baby rabbits, too many people with too little space between them, and wild animals making choices based on fear. A ranger arrived, finally, drawn by reports of the crowd. She took one look at the situation and started clearing people out. Her voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone back to the vehicles, now! This is protected land and you're harassing wildlife." They argued, of course they argued. This was the story of the year, maybe the decade. But she was firm, and she had a radio calling for backup, and slowly, reluctantly, they retreated. The rabbit waited until the last human was 100 yards away before he moved. He bounded toward the burrow, toward the lion who still stood guard. The lion's eyes tracked him coming, tracked the humans leaving, calculating safety in the changing geometry. When the rabbit reached him, the lion stepped aside, letting him pass into the burrow. Then he followed, squeezing his massive body into the entrance tunnel that was really too small for him. Forcing himself down into the earth where he barely fit, where the walls scraped his sides and his shoulders touched the ceiling. He made it to the main chamber where the doe huddled with the kits, all of them terrified by the noise and lights and human scent. The lion filled the chamber, barely able to move, but he positioned himself between them and the entrance. If the humans came back, they'd have to go through him first. The rabbit pressed against the doe, comforting the kits with his presence. Above them, through layers of earth, they could hear the humans still arguing with the ranger, hear vehicles starting, hear the chaos slowly dissipating. They stayed in the burrow all night. The lion couldn't turn around, could barely breathe in the confined space, but he didn't leave. The rabbit dozed against the doe, exhausted from fear and adrenaline. The kits slept in a pile, still too young to fully understand what they'd survived. By morning, the humans were gone. The ranger had established a perimeter, posted signs declaring the area temporarily closed for wildlife protection. The immediate threat was over. The lion extracted himself from the burrow with difficulty, emerging into dawn light with dirt in his mane and scratches on his sides from the tunnel walls. He shook himself, looked around at the trampled ground, the trash left behind, the scent of humans thick on everything. The rabbit emerged after him. They looked at each other, both understanding that something had changed. The alliance had been tested, not by natural forces, but by the attention it had drawn, by the human desire to witness and document and own every miracle they encountered. The warren wasn't safe anymore. The humans knew where it was. They'd be back, with permits and cameras and good intentions that didn't matter to the animals, who just wanted to survive. The rabbit looked at his home, the burrow his family had lived in for generations, the territory that had been safe until it became famous. Then he looked at the lion, and the lion looked back. Without words, they agreed. It was time to leave. Part 5. The Resolution and Renewal. They traveled at night, all of them, the lion leading, the rabbit and doe together, the 4 kits struggling to keep pace over ground they'd never seen before. Moving away from the warren, from the human attention, from the place that had been home, but was home no longer. The lion led them deeper into the desert, toward the box canyon where he'd first hidden from the hunters, toward territory more remote and harsh. The kits tired quickly, too young for such a journey. The lion slowed for them, stopping frequently, letting them rest against his sides, while the rabbit and doe scouted ahead for dangers. They traveled for 3 nights, hiding during the days in whatever shelter they could find. On the 2nd day, a hawk spotted the kits, circled lower, considering. The lion's roar echoed off the canyon walls, and the hawk decided easier prey existed elsewhere. On the 3rd night, they reached the box canyon. The spring was still there, still seeping from the rock, creating its small pool. The area around it had grown lush even in the drought, the deep water feeding roots that couldn't be touched by lack of rain. There was grass here, and flowers, and tender shoots. Enough to feed a rabbit family, at least for a while. The doe explored cautiously, the kits following her, discovering this new territory. The lion watched them, then looked at the rabbit. This was far from any human trail, any road, any place people would casually wander. Remote enough to be safe. Isolated enough to be forgotten. The rabbit understood. This was the lion's gift. Not just the location, but the protection it implied. The lion would stay here too, would make this his territory, would guard it the way he'd guarded the warren. The alliance continuing, relocated, adapted to survive. Over the next week, they established a new pattern. The doe dug a burrow in the soft earth near the spring, a complex warren with multiple entrances and escape routes. The rabbit taught the kits the plants here, which were safe, which gave the most nutrition. The lion marked the territory boundaries, leaving sign that told other predators this place was claimed by something too dangerous to challenge. The kits grew. Fed by the reliable food near the spring, protected by the lion's presence, they gained strength and size. By the end of the first month, they were nearly adult-sized, ready to establish their own territories when the time came. The drought continued, but the spring never failed. The rabbit sometimes wondered about its source. Was it snowmelt from the distant mountains? Water that had fallen as precipitation months or years ago, now emerging here through some quirk of geology? Or was it something deeper, more permanent, the desert's own secret reserve against the dry times? It didn't matter. It was enough. They survived. The human attention gradually faded. With the animals gone from the original warren, with no new sightings to fuel the story, the news cycle moved on to other miracles, other impossibilities. Some people still searched for the lion and the rabbit, still hiked into the desert hoping to witness the alliance. But the desert was vast, and the Box Canyon was well hidden, and the two species had learned to move like ghosts when humans were near. One evening, 2 months after they'd fled the warren, the rabbit sat beside the lion at the canyon's edge, watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of amber and rose. The doe was in the burrow with 3 of the kits. The 4th, a young male, was exploring the canyon with the fearless curiosity of rabbits who'd grown up beside a lion and didn't quite understand that the world was supposed to be dangerous for his kind. The lion rumbled, that sound that meant contentment, family, peace. The rabbit leaned against the massive paw, feeling the warmth there, feeling the steady pulse of life in the veins beneath the golden fur. They had traveled so far from the river, from the moment the rabbit had jumped into red water to save something that should have killed him, to this moment, sitting beside the thing had saved, both of them alive against all odds. The debt between them had transformed so many times, life for life, protection for guidance, family bound to family, until it wasn't a debt anymore, but something else, something that had no name in the language of instinct, but existed nonetheless. The young kit returned from his exploration, hopping up to the lion without fear, touching his nose to the massive paw before disappearing into the burrow. The lion watched him go, and something in his eyes was soft, almost tender. The rabbit thought about the kits he'd lost, the ones who died in the drought. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed too. Loss teaching him that mercy and survival existed in tension, that saving one life didn't guarantee saving all lives, that the world was cruel and kind in measures impossible to predict. But he'd tried. They'd both tried. And these kits, these 4 survivors, carried that effort in their bodies, in their lack of fear, in the way they moved through the world protected by an apex predator who'd learned to love prey. As the stars emerged, the rabbit made a decision. He stood, looked at the lion, and headed toward the canyon entrance. The lion rose to follow, but the rabbit stopped him with a look. This journey was solo. He traveled through the night, following memory and scent back toward the original warren. It took him until dawn, but he found it. The trampled ground grown over now with new grass, the burrow entrances collapsed, reclaimed by the desert. The graves of his lost kits were barely visible, just slight depressions in the sand. He sat beside them as the sun rose, said goodbye properly, the way he hadn't been able to when grief and fear and the need to save the survivors had consumed everything. The desert wind moved around him, carrying the scent of distant rain. The drought was breaking, finally. Soon this place would bloom again. The rabbit turned away from the graves and headed back toward the Box Canyon, back toward his living kits and his mate and the lion who'd become family in a way that rewrote the rules of what family could mean. He found the lion waiting at the canyon entrance, as if he'd known the rabbit would return here, to this specific spot. They walked back together, side by side, predator and prey who'd become something the world had no category for. When they reached the spring, the doe and all 4 kits were there, drinking in the morning light. The kits saw the rabbit and bounded to him, their joy uncomplicated, their love simple. He touched noses with each of them, then with the doe, affirming the bonds that held them together. The lion settled beside the spring, positioned where he could watch all the entrances to the canyon. The rabbit joined his family in the grass, grazing on the tender shoots, ordinary and alive. Above them, a hawk circled, saw the lion, and moved on. In the distance, a coyote howled, heard the answering rumble from the canyon, and chose to hunt elsewhere. The box canyon existed in a pocket of safety carved from the dangerous world, held together by an alliance that had survived drowning and drought, bullets and crowds, loss and grief, and the simple, relentless mathematics of trying to keep the ones you loved alive. The seasons would change, the kits would grow and leave to start their own families. The rabbit would age, as all prey animals aged quickly, burning bright and brief. The lion would hunt and guard and live out his years in this strange pride that had no precedent. But for now, in this moment, they were together. The river was a memory, the debt was paid 1,000 times over, and what remained was simpler than mercy and stranger than survival. It was family. It was choice. It was the quiet miracle of beings who'd learned to rewrite the rules written in their bones, to care across the distance that separated predator from prey, to survive not just as individuals, but as something collective and impossible. The sun climbed higher. The rabbit dozed in the shade beside the lion's flank, feeling the rise and fall of breathing that was not his, but that sustained him nonetheless. The kits played. The doe groomed herself. The lion kept watch. And the wild, which had no place for what they'd become, accepted them anyway, because the wild was nothing if not pragmatic. If it worked, if they survived, then it was natural enough. The categories only mattered until they didn't. Later, when the heat of the day passed and the canyon filled with evening gold, the rabbit woke to find the lion watching him. Those amber eyes held everything: the river, the rescue, the months of learning to trust, the flight from humans, the journey here. All of it reflected back, acknowledged, honored. The rabbit met that gaze steadily, without fear, without submission. Equals, despite everything biology said was impossible. Partners in an alliance that had bent the world around it, creating space for itself through sheer stubborn refusal to follow the script written in instinct and blood. The lion lowered his massive head, touched his nose gently to the rabbit's, and rumbled deep in his chest. The sound of pride, the sound of family, the sound of two creatures who'd learned that survival was sometimes enough, but sometimes you could reach for more, could reach across the divide that separated you from the thing that should kill you, and find not death, but life multiplied, complicated, and enriched. The rabbit returned the gesture, his small nose pressing against the lion's, his heartbeat steady and sure. In the box canyon, as the first stars emerged, predator and prey rested together. The spring flowed, the grass grew. The kits dreamed safe dreams, guarded by the thing that should hunt them, but instead protected them. And the world, which had been certain it knew all the stories animals could tell, learned to make room for one more.